So now, what are the roots of this crisis? At the heart of it is the modern doctrine of the consumer. Now, what's interesting to me is that the consumer in Old English meant the devil. He was called the consumer because he consumed the souls of people. And consumption was a name for the wasting disease in the 19th century. It's what killed people slowly. And so this whole idea of, I shop, therefore I am, shop until you drop, the one with the most toys at the end wins. This idea of just shopping, this was actually done to us. And I would recommend people reading William Leach, The Land of Desire, because he takes a period about from the 1890s till the 1930s and shows how our society was turned into a consumer society. It was conscious. It was done because they could produce a large number of goods and they wanted people to buy those goods. So we have to understand that this was something that was done to us, that people were not always consumers, that I've lived in cultures where they recycle everything because it's just simply, that's what they do. When I lived with the Bedouin, they use everything. Literally, they don't throw away anything. And now they're starting to get these throwaway items, and so you're seeing garbage everywhere now in the Sahara. Just plastics. In fact, Mauritania, and I'm proud to say this because I'm an honorary consul of Mauritania, but Mauritania outlawed plastic bags. It's a 1-year prison sentence to use plastic bags. And the reason that they did that is because so many of the goats, the livestock that they depend on, were dying, and they didn't know why until they found out they were eating the plastic bags out in the desert, and they were getting these intestinal diseases and dying from intestinal obstruction. And so the government outlawed the use of plastics. And again, this is where a government makes a choice and does something. So in the 1530s, consumer was one who squanders or wastes. So it had a negative connotation. The Quran says that people boast, I have squandered great wealth. And this is conspicuous consumption. I'll get back to this, but another major problem is the war economy. And this is where we, especially in the United States, where we have, we talk about budgets and making cuts and welfare mothers, and nobody wants to talk seriously about this obscene armaments. We were warned by Eisenhower as he was departing after spending his life serving the military and working with the military industry. He warned us about this new phenomenon, the military-industrial complex. And we have to recognize that the type of budgets that this country has for military spending are obscene. They are obscene. And it's money that could be going to much, much better things. This is the result of the aerial bombing that happened in Germany. And this is why we have to end war. As a species, we have to recognize it is an obsolete way. Clausewitz, the great war strategist from Europe, said that war was just the extension of politics by other means. So war is a political act, because in politics you try to get things done. When things aren't getting done through the traditional means of politics, then you use violence to get them done. It doesn't work anymore. If it ever worked, it's arguable, but it does not work. And these are the budgets. If you look at education compared to military spending, it's insane. I mean, Pakistan spends so much on the military. Some of the Gulf states have budgets. Saudi Arabia has a budget it's the 7th largest military budget after India, a country of 19 million people. Why? Because they're subsidizing Western industry. It's as simple as that. They don't use it. When the Gulf War came, the Americans came and other people. So why are these obscene budgets being used? And then we don't want to deal with this, but this can't go on either. Our prophet actually predicted that the time would come, he said, when the liver of the earth would vomit forth. And he said that it would be like pillars of gold and silver. And the one who kills on the day of judgment, he will come and say, this is the reason I killed for? And then the one being killed will say, this is the reason I was killed? And the wars, if you read Daniel Jurgen's book, The Prize, the 20th century was wars over oil. And oil is the blood of our technological society. It is the blood. And it's more precious than human blood for a lot of people. We cannot, if the average earthling lives like the average American, we will need 3 Earths to supply the consumption. It's impossible. It's untenable. It can't go on. Now, just moving to the self, what are some of the signs? Autism in 1970, and people can argue that this is from diagnostics and things like that, but we know from 2012 to 2013, no, something's happening here. We had 1 in 10,000 diagnosed. I mean, the first diagnosis of autism was in the 1950s, but now it's 1 in 50 in the United States. I mean, we have to really think seriously about what's happening. Now, if you look at the definition of autism, a pervasive developmental disorder characterized by severe deficits in social interaction and communication, by an extremely limited range of activities and interests, and often by the presence of repetitive stereotype behavior. This about defines everybody under 30. I mean, we have to really think about what's happening to our young people that are growing up with this technology. Repetitive, stereotypical practices, losing the ability to interact socially. Another major problem that we have is obesity. The Quran, and this is in all our traditions because gluttony is one of the deadly sins, but it reminds people, eat and drink but not to excess. God loves not the extravagant wasters. And one of the signs of the latter days, according to our tradition, is يَظْهَرُ فِيهِمْ السِّمَنُ, that obesity would become manifest. These are the average BMIs around the globe. You can see Africa and a lot of Asia. The Asians don't eat a lot of the food we eat. They're still on traditional diet. So China is behind other places, even though they're becoming rapidly a serious industrial nation, but they still eat cosmologically. If you look at Chinese food, one of the things about Chinese medicine, which I studied, and my sister's an acupuncturist, and one of the things I always thought that they lacked diet. They never talk about diet. If you go to a Chinese doctor, they don't focus on diet. And at a certain point, I realized it's because in their culture, they didn't need to. People just simply ate well by the very nature of the food they consumed. These are the world's fattest countries. We're number 2, so Americans are proud of being number 1, but Kuwait takes that. So there's McDonald's in Arabic, the Golden Arches. As you come into Mecca, the first thing you see is the Golden Arches. So it's a very troubling sight for me. But this is the civilization that we're living in, where on the one hand we've got this incredible scarcity, and on the other hand we have this overconsumption. It's so it's just so imbalanced. And there's a tradition that we have from our Prophet that a believer will not go to bed satiated knowing his neighbor is hungry. And that's any neighbor of any faith. Diabetes is a really important problem now that's globally. This is extraordinary what's happening. But I want to point out, in traditional cosmology, what happens inside of us happens outside of us. If you want to know why the oceans are acidic, it's because we're becoming acidic. Literally. We are becoming acidic. The world manifests our states, and that's why knowing our states is so important, because how we are, how we behave, what we do, all of this is going to be reflected in the world. The macrocosm can only reflect the microcosm. And so the acidosis of the oceans is related to the acidic levels that are happening. People are moving away from the natural state, which is an alkaline state, and moving towards an acidic state. And this is what happens when, by 2050, 1/3 of Americans will have diabetes at current rates. And if you look, there's a relationship between carbohydrates and hydrocarbons. There's a relationship chemically. So you're dealing, what we're using, oil is like sugar. We're giving the earth diabetes. It's becoming acidic. Our soil is becoming acidic, and our oceans are becoming acidic because we're using cheap energy. Sugar is a very quick energy for our bodies. Oil is a very quick, easily digested energy for our machines and for heating our homes. And so this results in this acidic state. And this is what diabetic acidosis is related, as far as this is my belief, that it's related to the acidic state of the planet. Another major problem, the UN estimates there are more slaves today than any other time in human history. And most of it, 80%, is sexual slavery. And this is another really serious problem, the problem of lust, that we're really not dealing with in our society. I really think we're in a deep denial about the serious problem of lust in this culture. And one of the most important thermometers for it is pornography. The size of the industry now is 57 billion worldwide. It's a massive industry. These are sound numbers, people. These are not exaggerated numbers. These are taken from one of our top universities. 12 billion in the US. Porn revenue is larger than all combined revenues of all professional football, baseball, and basketball franchises. US porn revenue exceeds the combined revenues of ABC, CBS, and NBC. If you look at the websites, 4.2 million, 12% of total websites now. Daily internet searches, 68 million. 25% of total searches. Monthly porn downloads, 1.5 billion. Websites offering illegal child pornography, over 100,000 websites. And for those of you who don't know, there's a deep web where there's just the darkness that goes on the deep web. And then 8 to 16-year-olds who have viewed porn online in our country, 90%. Gluttony, overconsumption. Those who squander are like siblings or the brethren of the demons. One of the things that we don't think about is the relationship to what we do and this darkness. People that are watching pornography are supporting human trafficking, because many of the women in these films that are done here in the United States and outside the United States are women in sexual bondage. They're not, you have these girls that appear on CNN getting their degree at Duke and saying how much they love being a porn star. Those represent a very, very, very tiny percentage of the actual women engaged in the porn industry, which degrades both men and women. Another thing is planned obsolescence. I would recommend, I'm not going to go through this, it's a very interesting thing, but the story of Stuff with Annie Leonard, many of you have probably seen it.
How did they get us to jump on board this program so enthusiastically?
It's definitely worth watching.
Well, two of their most effective strategies are planned obsolescence and perceived obsolescence. Planned obsolescence is another word for designed for the dump. It means they actually make stuff to be useless as quickly as possible, so we'll chuck it and buy a new one. It's obvious with things like plastic bags and coffee cups, but now it's even big stuff. Mops, DVDs, cameras, barbecues even, everything. Even computers. Have you noticed that when you buy a computer now, the technology is changing so fast that in just a couple of years, it's actually an impediment to communication? I was curious about this, so I opened up a big desktop computer to see what was inside. And I found out that the piece that changes each year is just a tiny little piece in the corner. But you can't just change that one piece because each new version is a different shape. So you gotta chuck the whole thing and buy a new one. So I was reading industrial design journals from the 1950s when planned obsolescence was really catching on.
See, this is the point, that this was done consciously.
They actually discuss how fast can they make stuff break that still leaves the consumer having enough faith in the product to go out and buy another one. It was so intentional. But stuff cannot break fast enough to keep this arrow afloat. So there's also perceived obsolescence. Now, perceived obsolescence convinces us to throw away stuff that is still perfectly useful. How do they do that? Well, they change the way the stuff looks. So if you bought your stuff a couple of years ago, everyone can tell that you haven't contributed to this arrow recently. And since the way we demonstrate our value is contributing to this arrow, it can be embarrassing. Like, I've had the same fat white computer monitor on my desk for 5 years. My coworker just got a new computer. She has a flat, shiny, sleek monitor. It matches her computer, it matches her phone, even her pen stand. She looks like she's driving in Spaceship Central, and I look like I've got a washing machine on my desk. Fashion is another prime example of this. Have you ever wondered why women's shoe heels go from fat one year to skinny the next to fat to skinny? It's not because there's some debate about which heel structure is the most healthy for women's feet. It's because wearing fat heels in a skinny heel year shows everybody that you haven't contributed to that arrow as recently, so you're not as valuable as that person in skinny heels next to you, or more likely in some ad. It's to keep us buying new shoes. Advertisements and media in general plays a big role in this. Each of us in the U.S. is targeted with over 3,000 advertisements a day. We see more advertisements in 1 year than people 50 years ago saw in a lifetime. And if you think about it, what's the point of an ad except to make us unhappy with what we have? So 3,000 times a day, we're told our hair is wrong, our skin is wrong, our clothes are wrong, our furniture is wrong, our car is wrong, we are wrong, but it can all be made right if we just go shopping. Media also helps by hiding all of this and all of this. So the only part of the materials economy we see is the shopping. The extraction, production, and disposal all happens outside of our field of vision.
It's important to bring backgrounds into the foreground so people understand. Because when we look, this is one of the things that painters do so effectively. Van Gogh, when you look at the shoes, you know, he painted several different, but if you look at the famous boots that he painted with the straight, you'll never look at a pair of shoes the same way if you really contemplate what he did, because he was taking something that's in the background and bringing it to the foreground. And it's very important for religious leaders, for artists, for others to do that, to let people know what's in the background, those things that we're not seeing, the things that are hidden. One of the things that our prophet told us is that there would be people towards the end of time like locusts in their consumption. Here we have martyrs to consumption. There are people that die on these buying sprees. Every year this happens in this country. People literally die because they're trampled to death because of these things. But another aspect that we don't think about is just garbage production. And the fact, one of the professors that was at my university, he taught environmental studies. He had zero garbage production in his home, and he used to take his students to his home to show what he did. In other words, people can actually live reducing their garbage to a great extent, but everything is packaged. Totally unnecessary packaging, and this leads to these landfills. It's beyond belief what's happening, and again, who suffers? The animals. They eat this stuff. When everybody lets off those helium balloons go to the ocean, they eventually go down, and turtles swallow them. They get the obstruction. So these simple things that people are doing without thinking. And now we have the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is bigger than the size of Texas. It's a huge, massive swell of garbage in the middle of the Pacific Ocean that, because of the tides and currents, it all tends to go to this one area. Now, there's a verse in the Quran. The angels ask God, and obviously this shouldn't be taken like a literal type conversation, but the angels ask God, when God created man in our tradition, the human being, how can you put someone therein who will cause damage and bloodshed when we celebrate your praise and proclaim your holiness? So the angels were asking this question. And there's a reason why the commentaries give. I'm not going to go into that. And you can certainly see that the incredible amount, over almost 200 million people were killed at the hands of other people in the last century, the 20th century. And we came into the 21st century with a lot of hope, but it begins with 9/11 and then these terrible wars that have affected us. But the response that God made was, "Inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun." I know what you don't know about the human being. And this is what we have to keep in mind. I put these pictures up because these are my personal teachers. These are people that I studied with. There's a verse in the Quran that says that we elevate those who do not want to sow corruption in the earth or to be elevated. And this is what we have to remember as a species, that we have people in this world that remind us of who we really are.